See you the Cara, welcome back. This is Siobhán, the Celtic Empath. I would like to welcome actually a number of new subscribers. Thank you for subscribing and for finding my content hopefully interesting and relevant. I have various different topics. I'm delighted that you found me. I don't stick generally to a strict niche at the moment, but I can assure you that everything that I talk about as the bigger picture, it all will be coming together. It's all a piece of work that eventually will make sense. So I'm not niching myself in completely, but there is, I guess, a theme. It's about energy and spiritual work and having spiritual alignment. And that is about spiritual alignment with ourselves and with the land and ancestry. So welcome all new subscribers. Welcome back to my regular subscribers that have been following and watching my content. So I really appreciate all of the watches and the liking that as well. That all helps with YouTube to like the content, because when it gets liked, thumbs up, YouTube can find the information and whatever. So there's like a whole thing that happens in the background and stuff. But today's video, going by the title, that whatever it is that I have decided to put up, it is a bit of a hot potato topic. And today I am going to be approaching this from the perspective of a healer, somebody who works with energy. So dare I say, I'm not a healer. I don't consider myself a healer. Actually, I'm somebody who works with energy. And so it's all about the energy, and it's all about, for me, what's really important, the connection with the energy work that we do is about our connection to ourselves. And that connection is often very dominant, the connection to our land, where we're living, where we come from, our ancestry. And so our ancestry connection is the root of a lot of our healing that needs to actually go on, cleaning out our ancestry. So that's a little bit of what this video is going to be about today. It's possible it's going to be a long one. So as they say, you might want to get comfortable. This could be 40 minutes or so of me just talking about stuff, but it's been quite interesting. I've been reducing my technology stuff that I've been using over the summer, so I really haven't been on social media an awful lot. I've reduced it down, and I guess that is obvious. I haven't been putting much content up on social media or on YouTube either. But also alongside that, I've been doing some energy work, working with clients with sessions. So doing aura sessions, which are the past life hypnosis regression sessions, which is also a technique, an entity removal technique. And using we use R.A.A.H Reiki. So I've been doing Reiki sessions and doing some land clearings, ancestral work as well. And so throughout this year, what has been happening is that it's been a process of working with a few different clients that have been coming to me and finding me energetically, that I've been working through healing sessions and clearing sessions, and a few conversations that I've had with people. So as you've guessed from the title of the video, this is connected to Africa. Mostly you could say African American people who are descended from Africa, and predominantly, I suppose, have ended up with ancestry from Africa, ended up in America. So you may call yourself African American, maybe not. And this is where the hot potato is, because I am this white Irish person in my home in Ireland, and this is a delicate subject that I'm going to be talking about, of which I have no direct experience of. I know that in America it could be a very volatile, upsetting type of a topic, but I am coming at this from the energetic point of view, and also from the healing point of view, in order to bring a message that, a spiritual message that has been coming through to me. So I am a guide, I'm an intuitive, I'm an empath, I channel energy, so I often work with various different guides and energies, and particularly ancestors that come through in perhaps my readings or come through in energy work that I'm doing. And sometimes they come to me during sessions when I'm clearing energy from people or from their homes or from the land where people are living, and an ancestor or somebody attached to the home, or somebody who's not even attached to the home but connected more so to the healing that needs to occur in the land. An individual might come through to me that can give me aid or help that helps me to deepen the clearing work. And that's what has been happening this year. So I've been working with a number of various different clients and having conversations with people that are of African American descent. Now, and it is in relation to slavery. So this healing message, spiritual message that has been coming through, that I have been requested by this particular spirit to start relaying this message, because I've had so many experiences around this issue that is looking for healing. And this message is going to try to inform how some of this deeper healing can actually occur, a method and a way of how to go about the healing, maybe what is required of the people involved, that how they can start to actually heal themselves, or heal their own bloodlines, heal their genetics, heal their family, and inevitably start calling back parts of themselves that are missing, so which is the ancestry part. And so what has happened is that, you know, as we have gone through many traumatic events all throughout life, lots of us, this is part of this disconnection that we carry so much, you know, hurts and trauma inside of us, is that we've been traumatized in so many ways. And so this trauma has disconnected us. So there's a big disconnection going on. And once the trauma is in there, it's really, really difficult to reconnect, to bring back the reconnection. So this spiritual message that's been coming through to me, and I'm going to put it more into context as well. So there'll be a bit of a story around how this actually happened. And I'm going to give a little bit more detail and eventually bring all of this together. So bear with me. I'm going to get to all of the various different components that are involved here with this message, and then the message itself exactly. So I've been linking in and healing, working with people, transmuting negative energy around, we'll say, the hot potato subject, which is around slavery. And you could say in one respect, okay, what does she know about slavery? Okay, because I have obviously no direct experience, and I can't even say that I actually have ancestors that have experienced slavery. I don't actually know. So I am going to bore you a little bit with a slight bit of history, because the history is everything. This is the root of the things of our disconnection as well. It feeds into, it's all part of, you know, where we're at as a society and as humanity, why we're all so confused, why we're all so disconnected from one another, disconnected from ourselves, we're disconnected from our homelands, our countries, from our ethnicity, and from, you know, our genealogy. So the great disconnect is actually happening internally inside of us. And part of this deep ancestral work, which is very powerful when we start to reclaim our ancestry. So this is the root of the message. We're being called all the time to look at our ancestry and to start reclaiming it. And that does lead into why so many people are really curious and interested into their ancestry, like who are they, where did they come from? But what I've been showing, because of the absolute like horrendous trauma that has happened as a result of slavery to particularly the African American person that has come now, you know, so look, please be patient with me, because I'm trying not to be too PC about this, because I'm not a PC type of person. I don't actually want to obviously insult anybody, but so I don't know exactly what are all the correct terms and everything that I should be using. I'm just going to talk quite simply and plainly and quite directly about this. Slavery is interesting because slavery has gone on for centuries. Okay, so there was white slavery as much as there actually was black slavery. The earliest records of slavery, so just bear with me because we're going to go into a little bit of history, but I'm not going to go too far with it. Like, as an Irish person, we've experienced slavery. So we actually were the first earliest records in history that exist, apparently, are records of Irish slavery. And Irish slaves were taken off to the West Indies, so Jamaica, Barbados. A lot of those islands they have quite a history, an Irish ancestry, and particularly Jamaica, it seems to be quite almost more obvious there. Even the accent and how Jamaicans speak, when you hear them as an Irish person, I can actually hear an Irish lilt in how we would say things, and the old way that we would say in the Gaelic sort of lilt of the language. And there's even a funny story, back in the 1700s, some guy had done something wrong. I don't know, he maybe tried to escape slavery or something I believe it was in Jamaica. And when the slave masters, whoever they were, caught up with him, they arrested him. And this is a story that went down in history, one story out of thousands that have been lost. But he was classed as being African. He was an African slave. When they questioned him, asked him for his name, was Jack, which would be an Irish name. And they couldn't actually speak to him because it turned out he didn't speak English, or he didn't speak any of the local, whatever maybe the indigenous Jamaican language would have been at the time. He actually spoke one language, and it was fluent Gaelic, which is Irish, Old Irish. Gaelic Irish. And that story for some reason has at least been recorded. But he was a black African dude, but he only spoke Gaelic. So a lot of Jamaican Barbados people are descended from Irish. There was a lot of breeding that would have went on together. Irish slaves would have been classed as being the poorest. We were like the pond scum of slaves. Can you believe that there was like a hierarchy? Like, how disgusting is that? But we were the pond scum. We were the cheapest. Anyone could afford us, right? And then you had like the African slave, which was more expensive than the Irish slave. And then you had the child that was produced from an African and Irish person, and that slave was considered the most expensive. They were actually highly prized. Yeah, wonderful stuff. And so, you know, the history of America, unfortunately, is built on this horrible history of slavery. And so it is like an experience that is not just predominantly African. It has been built on white Irish slavery. There is other records of slavery around white people. Slavery has been going on for centuries. This is the thing. And this is why in a lot of my videos, I often refer to as like the true history, like our true world history. It's been distorted. We haven't been told the truth. It's been rewritten depending on who the historian is, depending on the academic agenda that a certain university or college ascribes to. History has been changed depending on a person's own opinion or biasness or whatever kind of opinion, a certain individual, an intention that they might have of certain information that they want to, you know, make their career on. Information has been distorted and not recorded, and it's been rewritten. And a lot of Irish history has been totally rewritten and also written out of history. So world history is really, really important, and trying to get to the bottom of the one that we haven't been told about, our roots, you know, who we actually really truly are, and the connections between us globally. And I'm talking about globally, centuries ago, not just now. Globally, we were in contact with each other all over the continents and everything. How are Irish and African people connected and related? I don't know. The slavery thing is very interesting because we certainly bonded over that. That's a sure thing. So that's like a deep, deep psychological wounding that's going to be a very deep schism in the psychology of Irish people and African people as well. So not just for the people who experienced the slavery, but the people who indirectly experienced it, which was their family members being separated and, you know, maybe finding out that their loved one was in slavery in America. Can you imagine what that must have been like? So the bonds of slavery, oh my God, I mean, you can look at that in so many different ways, because people were bonded in trauma, and trauma is this terrible, terrible thing. This is the disconnect. So when you traumatize people, this is how you disconnect them. We disconnect from inside of ourselves internally. This is the most important thing, is what happens to us individually when trauma is inflicted. And then how we disconnect from one another. So we stop being able to relate to each other. It can be really difficult if you have constant trauma being put on top of more trauma. There's no chance for actually healing that trauma. There's no way to actually get yourself out of it. And it's a constant bombardment. So this is what has been happening for centuries. And then you throw into that then the agenda of programming and brainwashing that has been really quite heavily done as well. That's also gone on for centuries. That isn't something new that just started in the past 100 years. It's been going on for much longer. And we know that in Ireland, like for the past 500 years or more, the way our history and our culture was literally tried to be stamped out, like a tiny island. We're a small little island country, nation, and they've tried for centuries, certain factions, you know, certain whoever these people are that come up with these agendas, regardless of whatever nation or culture they come from. It's all this negative infringement that has been happening from the point of view where we come from as aura hypnosis therapists, and the information that's been disclosed through the hypnosis sessions. So this infringement is endemic, and it's global. So we've all been traumatized in like loads of different ways. And then there's the traumatic bonding that goes on as well. So being traumatically bonded to our slave masters as such, and traumatically bonded to the people that wound us deeply. And so this has gone permeated down into society, just this rippling effect. Not only that, but what has happened to our ancestors. And so this is the point where you got to think back to, if you're African, descended from Africa, have you thought about like your first ancestor, the first one that experienced slavery? Like, can you think about the circumstances, how they ended up on a boat from Africa? Why did they get on it? How did they get on it? And they end up traveling, maybe on a promise. Maybe they were told they were coming to the promised land. They were going to have a great new life. Oh, we need people to populate this new country, and you're going to have a whole new tribe of your own. You can set up you know, your whole community, and we need people to populate the communities, blah, blah, blah. God only knows what they were told. And these people got on a boat. The first couple of boats, I'm sure they were manipulated and told certain things to get on. And then subsequently, it wasn't so sweet after that. But imagine all those people coming over, and then they end up in the situations that they end up. I mean, can you put yourself in that situation and think, you know, how absolutely awful and detrimental that was to those people to first find themselves in such horrendous situations in slavery. The African people were so tribal, they were so community based. There was no such thing as separation. I mean, that tribal sense of closeness and interconnectedness of being raised and living on that land in Africa, how strongly connected they would have been to the land that they are, because that land in Africa is so, so strong. It permeates such an incredible energy. So can you imagine the trauma, even for them just to be separated, the separation trauma from the land, from their community, from their tribes, and then end up in this horrible situation. So that trauma in itself, that disconnect there straight away, that's already setting in for, you know, making the person vulnerable and weaker. And then these people couldn't escape. They had no way of escaping. And how in tarnation were they going to reorientate themselves back from America back to Africa? It just didn't happen. Just didn't happen. I don't think anybody probably did that, at least nobody that we know about that would have been managed to do that. The only way was trying to free themselves now within this new country, this new land where they found themselves. So I'm going somewhere with this. The whole thing with trauma is that at the very, very root of trauma, and this is going to be hard to actually hear, and it's hard for us to feel into it because it's so deep when trauma happens. And the repetitive trauma, when we're living in it and re-experiencing it all the time, is what happens is we experience a deep amount of shame. And shame is this undercurrent emotion that is kind of sitting at the very bottom of the lake, and it, you know, it's the dark, murky thing, and it's the hardest part to actually get to look at, because so many other things are permeating and coming out of the shame of what has happened to you, regardless of the situation. So the shame, you know, we can be feeling other emotions, lots of other emotions that we have to like sort through and get through, which is, you know, the pain, guilt, grief, loneliness, anger, of course, common one. You know, it seems to be easier for us to almost feel anger, but you know what's behind the anger. We can have a lot of other things that's the undercurrent to the anger, but the shame is the one that lies at the bottom, and that's deeply comes out of trauma, whatever kind of trauma we experience. And so this shame is going to hold you as well in that position. So it makes it harder for us to actually free ourselves from trauma and from the people that we bond to in trauma, which can be our persecutors, you know, the bullies, our caretakers, people who are supposed to look after us and traumatize us. And then out of shame, we actually end up enmeshing and staying bonded to these people. So the trauma of slavery, I mean, the trauma of anything is deeply complex. The wounding of trauma is extremely complex. And then you've the trauma of slavery, like there isn't even words really to describe it, because it was so horrendous, the treatment and what was done to people. But the spiritual message, this is the main part. So throughout these healing sessions, when I'm working with people whose ancestors are coming to me, one particular energy came to me, and this was an African Sangoma. And so he's been coming to me through various different, connecting in through the different healing sessions that I've been doing. And what I've noticed with a number of people is that I'm connecting back to their ancestry, but I'm connecting back to their source, which is the African source. And even if, you know, it could be 5, 6, 7 generations maybe of African descent living in America or living anywhere, the UK, living in France, anywhere else. But the message is, I mean, the ancestors are connecting back in. They're looking to connect back with African people who are not living in Africa, who are not on African land. And there's a very clear message came through from this Sangoma. He was a very strong Sangoma, and he is helping me connect with other people's ancestry and with their tribes, so their tribal ancestry. And this is how far back we go when we're in healing sessions. So we're going back a good few generations, but we're going back to the land, because the African land is really, really powerful and really strong. And this Sangoma his message was, he refers to Africa first and foremost as the motherland. And when he asks me to speak about the motherland to people who are of African descent, he actually refers to as being the children of the motherland. And he talked about shame and trauma to me, and he described and explained to me, of course, and it makes perfect sense to me afterwards. I was like, of course, this is part of what happens to all of us. We get things handed down to us in our genealogy. This is why ancestral work is actually so important. So going back to your ancestors, particularly the ones who experienced the slavery first and foremost, but also the people they left behind. So your ancestors that were left behind in Africa, your tribes, your community. This is something that is so strong within the African genealogy. There's this different tribal connection, and it's really strong in the African blood to have a sense of community and tribe. I mean, it's true for all of us. We've all belonged to different tribes and communities. But the energy that comes from the motherland into people from the land, like, is just incredibly powerful. This sense of unity, it's so strong. And the Sangoma, he is actually saying that, yes, this shame, a lot of the shame that African people are experiencing today, they feel shame about themselves. There's programming that has been done, heavy programming. This is part of information that came through recently in an Aura session. And the programming that has been done to Black American people has been very heavy. And for some reason, it's as if all other slavery that happened, white slavery and every other color slavery, has been kind of written out of history. It's not talked about, but this intense focus has been put onto Black slavery, African slavery. And for some reason, and I don't know why, don't have that answer, why did the nefarious energies decide to focus on Black slavery, on African slavery, and they put this in a kind of a strong intention around them to disempower Africa, of course, because Africa has been, and this is more about the earth healing, the resources. Africa is extremely resourceful and rich, and it has been plundered, absolutely plundered. So not just the resources within the land, but the people have been plundered as well. So there's this, okay, so there's many different elements. There is this element of fighting back. There is a message in about fighting back. But of course, there was a time when your ancestors weren't able to fight back. And that the Sangoma is telling me that there's a lot of shame around this, and there's a shame that has been handed down through the genetics. So anything that has happened to our ancestors, it absorbs. So just like the land, because we're not separate to the land, we actually are very similar to it, because we stand on it with our feet. We connect to the land, regardless of whether or not we've even any idea at all that our energy is connecting to the land. The very fact that we stand on it, we're connecting. Of course, the job is to intentionally connect more so to the land and have a right intention about the energies we're connecting into. But the Sangoma is saying, of course, all the shame has handed down, so it gets absorbed into the body, into the psyche, into the emotions, into the intelligence. It gets absorbed, literally it absorbs into like our blood, into the skin, into our genetics. And so the shame, massive shame and trauma around slavery from the first people that experienced it, from their extended families and communities that lost all of these people and then were completely helpless to do anything about it, couldn't save them, couldn't warn the people, the people in America couldn't warn future African people to not come, or couldn't warn them to fight. This is what I'm hearing. They couldn't warn them to fight. And so this allowed then this massive inflicting, an intense inflicting of slavery to occur. And that was the disempowerment straight away. It happened quickly. And this seems to be how trauma happens. It's sudden, it's quick, it could be a shock, So the most dramatic way and to make the most impact on disconnecting us is to cause shock. And the best way to do that is to make it really sudden and painful and quick. And you really can't, because you're in such a world of pain. People find themselves maybe not being able to do anything, which is a part of the normal human response, survival thing that goes on. But the Sangoma is saying that, you know, this generational shame has been handed down. And of course, it's not helped then, of course, with this programming that has gone on, programming Black culture, African-American culture into being beaten down, and the way they were beaten back. And this is the message that came through a very beautiful aura session that I just did recently as well, where this came up around the programming, deep programming that has been focused on African-American slavery and the people that have survived it, around being beaten back and so not feeling good about themselves. So this is further impacting and the shame, and it's just completely cutting their legs out from underneath them. So this is shame. Anybody in the world that has experienced trauma experiences shame. But it is part of this deep wounding, and African people feeling, or African descendants, people who, because if you're anyway, have any ancestry at all, that you're connected to Africa, you're carrying this lineage, you're carrying the energy of what has been done, and it's in the genetics. And this is where how powerful it is to start doing ancestry work and ancestry healing. And the Sangoma he is actually putting a call out. And I know this is kind of strange. The call is coming through some white girl who lives in Ireland. And yeah, you know, this is not something I take lightly. This is something I've thought about, you know, to have to bring this message across, but I can no longer ignore spirit. If spirit comes to me and has a message, now I'm like, okay, no matter how awkward this is, I'm going to talk it anyway. It has to be talked, but spoken. The Sangoma expresses this calling back to the African people who have been descended, particularly connected to slavery. He's calling you back is what he's doing, and he's been calling you back for quite some time. This shame needs to be healed, and so it is all about reconnecting internally, because that's where it all happens. The disconnect happens internally first and foremost. So it's about reconnecting with yourself, with your heart, and about healing this generational shame. So this is what the root of it. It's generational, it's ancestral. And he showed me a beautiful image of thousands and thousands and thousands of African ancestors who are calling all of their African descendants to come back and to start reconnecting back with the motherland. And this was the message. And your Sangoma, he doesn't expect you to get on a plane and have to go to Africa to reconnect. You can stand on a piece of land wherever it is that you live, in a park, or even walking down a footpath, and there's a piece of land underneath a tree growing in the city. It doesn't matter where you are. There's this intentional energy. If you stand on a piece of land and intentionally want to reconnect back to Africa, the Sangoma is ready and waiting for that intention, for the energy of that, for you to be able to start reconnecting powerfully into that, into the motherland. So when he showed me this, thousands of faces, so it was a sea of faces, and all of these African people are all of your ancestors, and they're calling African people back to start reclaiming themselves, start reclaiming their ancestry, because this is the deep wounding, and it's generational trauma. It's not even all your own trauma, but it's been impacted then by agendas, by brainwashing, by programming. And if you stop, the focus is to turn internally, not to be distracted, because that is how it keeps propagating when we keep looking externally. But when we start to look inside of us, and start looking back to your ancestry, finding out who your ancestors are, reclaiming those stories in your family, maybe those lost stories, maybe a relative who's still alive actually has some information or stories about your ancestors, you know, reclaiming that for yourself. And if there isn't somebody that can hand down or give you information about, you know, people that have gone, your grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, or, you know, other relatives, uncles and aunts and cousins that have passed over, there may be other records, there may be other ways as well to actually viscerally, physically connect with your ancestors. And, you know, go to the oldest person relative in your family, if it's possible. Can you get more information from them? Have they got old photographs that still exist? And going to the relative organizations and agencies that have this information, and they have a lot of documented information. So this is to reconnect and start reclaiming, and your Sangoma is really calling for you to do this. When he showed me the sea of faces of your African ancestors, they were all singing. And they sing 24/7 around the clock. They never actually stop. And they do this because there's an awful lot of pain, that they are still in that disconnect, that their descendants are not connecting back to Africa. And what they're singing is, and this is my first experience of this, I've heard it talked about before, but I've never connected with this before. But what they're singing is what's called the soul song. And there's literally thousands of them singing the soul song. And if you research the soul song for African indigenous tribes, this was actually, it's still a well-known thing in Africa. And still some tribal communities in Africa, I believe, still practice this, singing the soul song when you're born. And so this is incredibly important in relation to anybody who's descended from Africa. If you have any African blood in you, your descendants are singing your soul song, and I have seen them singing it, and they're singing it 24/7, and they will keep singing it until you start to reclaim your ancestry. And to not look at them with shame anymore, the shame that you feel, the shame that they were in slavery in the first place, the shame that maybe they let this happen to them, you know, the shame that they didn't fight back. All of this shame, 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 shame. A lot of it isn't even yours, but because you may have this genetic shame, it's shame that's been carried on through the generations and the centuries. And it's like your Sangoma actually allowed me to feel his energy, and he allowed me to feel his heart space. And his heart space was in pain because of the disconnection, and because so many African people have disconnected from the land. So many ancestors have been lost and haven't returned back, and are not reclaiming their heritage. And so that's his big message for you. And it is African specific. I mean, all of our nations and our cultures are all disconnected and have suffered in so many different ways. So please don't think that this is like just a personal thing that's only just focusing on one nation. But it kind of is, because this is spirit. This is what happened. This is what has come through. The connections are what happened. That last week I did a land clearing, house clearing for a home in America, and this particular land we cleared for quite a few miles around it. But when what actually came up during the session is, now it was common knowledge that there was a history of slavery in this particular area. And so there was a lot of, like, you know, strange dark energies and entities. And so eventually we got to the root of what was causing this negative energy in the home and the land. So there was a lot of, there was Black African slaves who had been killed, and their bodies had been left just on the spot where they were killed. And so they were never given a proper burial. Now, the family that are living in this particular home are definitely, this is why, you know, the opportunity for us to heal ourselves and heal everything now is so heightened. We're moving into this era of absolutely, it's not just healing, it's cleansing, it's clearing, it's getting rid of all the bad stuff, and it's happening. And we have massive opportunity all the time to be able to do this. So this family moved into this home, and they've been doing so much healing and clearing work already, but there was always just this one thing that they just couldn't get to the root of. So finally we got to that root. There was a demonic energy that was attached to the home and the land, and it had been put there specifically by a lady who had some bad feelings about, negative feelings about what had happened to her race, to her culture. And so it's understandable in some ways that this was put there, but this energy was then wreaking havoc on the community and had been for a long, long time. And of course, on the property was the bodies that hadn't been given a proper burial. Now all of that's been cleared and healed, and over a succession of various different people actually coming in to heal and clean that land and be kind of guardians and custodians to it, so that we no longer have to allow this infringement to occur anymore, because we're all becoming more sovereign now. We're all becoming more clear channels. We're all becoming more, Gaia's frequency is upgrading. So the earth is actually doing its best to expel or absorb these energies. But we all as humans, we have a part to play in this as well. So we can't just ignore it anymore. We've an active participation to actually, we are channels, we are bridges for the love healing energy to come in to clear out the density and the negativity. And that's what we're doing. We're acting as bridges when we're doing light work. People who, you know, we identify ourselves as being light workers, whatever, you know, star seeds, warriors, you know, all of these various different things that we identify ourselves as now as you know, spiritual warriors and new agers and on so forth. There's so many different terms. They're all just terms at the end of the day. What we're all hopefully doing, as long as we have the right intention, is that we're actually transmuting out negative energy and we're bringing in the good stuff. And so this demonic energy had to be cleared away from the land in order for the good energy to come in and do its stuff. And that has changed the environment an awful lot for that piece of land and for quite a few miles around that land. But the biggest part that came out of that land and house clearing, of course, was the work around slavery and the healing that needs to occur around slavery in America. I mean, I'm sure that throughout the world, there's many nations that have unconscious, like, woundings to slavery that needs to be healed. But this particular experience and this video is around that clearing that has happened, this story. So that is kind of it. Gosh, did I talk for a long time? It feels like a long time. Oh my God, that's not an hour, is it? So the thing around ancestry is that You know, some people, if you haven't even thought about ancestry, you might be wondering, like, sure, what the hell is ancestors, people who are dead and gone, got to do with anything? How can they actually be helping us to heal and clear? The one thing in my experience that is kind of the knowledge that's starting to resurge is that, yeah, people die from this physical experience that we're in. They die, they pass over, their body decomposes and all of that, but like there's their energy, whether you call it a soul, a spirit, whatever, there's an energy that exists, because we're all just energy as well at the end of the day. So that energy continues on. It goes into the next dimensional energy. I prefer to kind of call it as a timeline as opposed to a dimension. Some people may call it heaven. Other people may think they might be gone to hell, wherever, you know, purgatory even, depending on whatever your beliefs are. So, but for me, it's like it's another timeline. The energy has just transmuted over. It's gone to another plane of existence. And so it's easier sometimes for these other energies, timelines, to be able to come to, when we're open to it, I suppose, as individuals, when we've been doing the spiritual clearing on ourselves, on our own physical bodies, and on our own corporeal, spiritual, soulful bodies. When we become lighter in our vessels, it's easier for us then to make contact or communicate with these other energies who are just in another timeline. They're not entirely gone anywhere. They're not dead and gone and disappeared and that's it, done and dusted, don't exist anymore. All of those energies of our ancestors still exist, just in a different frequency, different timeline. So that is how and why your ancestors are still extremely relevant, and how they're able to reconnect with us when we have the right intentional vibration, the right level of energy, that we can hold the energy to be able to make contact with them, or for them to be able to contact us. So your ancestors are not just dead and gone. Basically, they're still very much, you know, viable and communicatable, and energy just changes. That's really it. And so that is why sometimes, through the help of our ancestors, that we can actually do a lot of really deep healing. They can help us in so many different ways, and they're just as connected to the land, to the earth, to Gaia, is more important than what was I going to say? I can't remember. Like, their connection is still really strong, because it's the connection into the energies of how important this planet is, and the existence of other planets and other timelines and other galaxies and the cosmos. So the Earth is just a tiny, tiny little speck in all of that, but we're, you know, we're just as important. Our existence is just as important. But your ancestor is just a beautiful energy that has changed, but it's not gone. So let's not forget about them. Let's help them to connect with us. Let's help them to help us in the capacity, in the way that they want to help us. You know, call in your benevolent ancestors, the ancestors that have done the work themselves spiritually. So they're the ones that we connect with, benevolent ancestors. Not the ones sometimes who've passed over and they still haven't learned the lessons. So they're still kind of cycling through a different process. So we don't, you know, to be discerning. You know, if you had an aunt or a parent or grandparent that you didn't get on with, and they were really not very nice and cruel to you, you know, that's not an ancestral connection that you want to connect with or call back in. So you only want to call in your benevolent ancestors, the ones who have progressed spiritually and done the work. So that's really important discernment. So that's kind of it. This has been maybe one of my longest videos ever. If you've managed to actually stay listening to me for this length of time to get the message, thank you so much, because I really appreciate it. I feel like this is an important message to get out there. And yeah, I appreciate the listening. I appreciate the likes. I appreciate the subscribes. Yeah, because this is, you know, the future. Our future depends on us being able to become sovereign and empower ourselves. And empowering ourselves, we're able then to empower other people as well. So that's what we want. Yeah, sovereignty.